1 Peter 3:18. I don't remember exactly what I said last week, but I'm pretty sure I said that this passage has always given me trouble, and I couldn't give you a specific think so about what Peter is trying to get across. But I've got a little better handle on it. I don't know if what I've learned is correct, but it makes more sense to me than where I've been before. So we'll start in verse 18. And of course, Peter's theme through the whole letter is suffering for the cause of Christ. Living a life that's above reproach, even in problems, in situations that are difficult to deal with. Slavery, difficult marriages, unbelieving spouses, all of those kinds of things. If we can keep our Christianity afloat, then we can be useful to the people around us. So go back to verse 18. Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God. He was put to death in the body, but made alive in the spirit. We'll just stop for just a second there, because one of the commentaries I was reading mentioned Isaiah in this passage, and it hadn't dawned on me that maybe Peter was thinking about Isaiah. In Isaiah 53, when he talks about the suffering servant, the one who took upon himself our sins and our iniquities, that we like sheep have gone astray, but God has put on him the iniquity of us all. So you've got the righteous suffering for the unrighteous to bring us to God. Put to death in the body, but made alive in the spirit. So the difference here is between what happens while we're in the physical body and what happens in the spiritual body. And all along, Peter has been saying, you may suffer physically. Something may happen to you. You may be ill-treated. You may be ill-spoken of in the physical body. But that's just in the physical body. The spiritual body is a different matter. So Christ was put to death in the body, but made alive in the spirit, in the spiritual realm. And after being made alive, he went and made proclamation to the imprisoned spirits, to those who were disobedient long ago, when God waited patiently in the days of Noah while the ark was being built. In it, only a few people, 8 in all, were saved through water. And this water symbolizes baptism that now saves you also. Not the removal of dirt from the body, but the pledge of a clear conscience toward God. It saves you by the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at God's right hand with angels, authorities, and powers in submission to him. And that last little phrase may have something to do with who it was Jesus was talking to while he was in the spirit. After he was in the body, after he was crucified, maligned in the physical body, then he moves into his spiritual being. And in his spiritual being, he has no one that can malign him. He has no one that can hurt him. There's nobody who can do anything to Christ, because Christ has already suffered in the body, and now he's been made free in the spirit. Run over to Genesis 6, and we'll look at a couple of possibilities for who it was that he went and spoke to or made proclamation to after he had suffered physically. All right. When human beings began to increase in number on the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Okay, so possibility number one is the sons of God. We're talking about angelic beings. So the angels that fell, the angels that rebelled against God. One possibility is that Jesus went after having been crucified, perhaps even after being raised from the dead, when he's in his spirit form at some time, went and made a proclamation. What proclamation would he have made to them? Not a proclamation of the gospel, not let me tell you the good news so you could be saved, but a proclamation of victory, so that Jesus has now been crucified, dead, raised from the dead. He is in charge of everything. So you look at the last phrase there in 22, he's in heaven at God's right hand with angels, authorities, and powers in submission to it. So theory number one is that we're talking about fallen angels, and Jesus is able to pronounce his ultimate victory over them. While he was on earth, there were lots of little skirmishes between Jesus and demons, right? So Jesus is at battle with the spiritual realm the whole time he's in the flesh. But once he's been crucified and purchased our salvation, those angels that fell, their doom is sealed. There's nothing that they could do anymore. They've lost their power. If you go over to Revelation, and I meant to see the exact verse, but it talks about, John says, I saw Satan cast down from heaven, and there was no more place found for him in heaven. So at some point, and I think it's at the time of Jesus' resurrection, Satan was just completely barred from the heavenly realm. Prior to that, it seems like he was able to be there. It seems weird to us, but like in Job, the sons of God, the angels are talking to God, they're gathered together, and Satan also was there. And Satan is in the very presence of God, and he's talking to God about Job, and he's even getting God to allow him to do things to Job. Right? So there was a time when Satan had the kind of clout that he could be in the heavenlies. At some point, he was cast down. I think it's at the time of Jesus' resurrection. There's nothing else that these fallen angels can do to battle against the Son of God. Okay, so you have possibly the sons of God, that would be the angels. Then the very next section, they saw the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. One theory says maybe we're talking about the children, maybe the Nephilim that are mentioned a little later. But the Lord said, my spirit will not contend with humans forever. They're mortal. Their days will be 120 years. So the second theory is that we're talking about folks who have been physically human, but are dead, and so they're in the spirit realm. But Jesus shows his authority, his pronunciation of his own victory to them. And then, of course, you've got the Nephilim. But verse 5 is kind of the defining thing. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth. Every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. And the Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth. His heart was deeply troubled. So the Lord said, I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created. So there was a time when they were so evil for so long that God just said, we're going to have to get rid of him. The people in Peter's day that he's writing to are dealing with lots of immoral people. The Roman Empire was an extremely immoral society. As it got as it got farther and farther along in history, it got worse. And part of the undoing of the Roman Empire was just the vastness of the immorality that was at work. Just all kinds of things that were happening in that society. So again, Jesus has gone into heaven. He's at God's right hand. He has proclaimed his absolute authority through his death and resurrection. So now 4. This is where we haven't been before. Therefore, because Jesus has had this victory, because Noah and his family had victory by being on the ark, right? Hundreds of thousands perhaps were killed in the flood, but Noah and his family were saved. So it doesn't matter how many evil people there are, as long as you're on God's side, then you have salvation. So therefore, since Christ suffered in his body, arm yourself also with that same attitude, because whoever suffers in the body is done with sin. Love that quote. Whoever suffers in the body is done with sin. Why do you think he says that? What's the evidence that they're done with sin? How about their willingness to suffer? Right? There were ways to get around suffering in the first century. There are ways to get around being ostracized in the 21st century. If you just live like other people live and act like other people act, you'll be accepted. If you try to live a godly life, if you try to, not even that you're pushing anything on them, just that you're living a Christ-like lifestyle, people will be angry. Not everybody, but some people will be angry because you're not like they are. And to them, that's an affront. It's like you're insulting them or saying there's something wrong with them because you're living a more holy lifestyle. So whoever suffers in the body is free from sin means if you're willing to go to the nth degree, if you're willing to take a beating for it, then you don't have to worry so much about sin anymore. You're not going to take a beating one day and then decide, well, I'll just go back to living a sinful lifestyle. You've already overcome that. You've already made it past that hurdle, so you don't have to keep worrying about it. As a result, they do not live the rest of their earthly lives for evil human desires, but rather for the will of God. You have spent enough time in the past doing what pagans choose to do, living in debauchery, lust, drunkenness, orgies, carousing, and detestable idolatry. They are surprised that you do not join them in their reckless, wild living, so they heap abuse on you. Isn't that a neat list? They are living in debauchery, lust, drunkenness, orgies, carousing, and detestable idolatry. Nothing has changed. Right? In Peter's day, they had that list. We could make our own list that would be pretty similar. Right? There are lots of folks who do not want to live a godly life and eventually become angry and abusive toward those who do. But they will have to give an account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. So we're back to this theme of what happens when you're living and what happens when you're dead. Jesus was alive in the flesh, he suffered, but then when he went into the spirit world, he triumphed. The people in Noah's day, thousands died, but Noah was connected to God, so he lived. Christ suffered in the body, was made alive to God. We should be willing to suffer in the body so that we don't have to worry about giving in to sin if we're go the nth degree. So all of these have to do with, who's really in charge of our lives. These people who heap abuse on you will have to give an account to the one who is ready to judge the living and the dead. So you will come out victoriously because the judge has all the authority. Christ already suffered. He's been made alive again, so he's got authority. God is the creator, the one that brought the flood. He's got authority. So as long as you are where you need to be, then these other people who are abusing you will have to stand before God. Then verse 6 is the other end of the odd exchange here. We started with the possibility of Jesus going and speaking to those who were dead during the time of Noah. And now we come to another verse that's also interesting. For this reason, the gospel was preached even to those who are now dead, so that they might be judged according to human standards in regard to the body, but live according to God in regard to the spirit. I think what Peter is saying is that everybody has their opinion here. The people who are around you have their opinion of who you are based on who they think you ought to be and what's acceptable in their world. So you are judged according to human standards in regard to the body. So as long as you're alive and people are judging you according to what you're doing physically, then you're judged that way. But you're also judged according to God in regard to the spirit. So you know that if things are horrible now and you're treated poorly and people misjudge you and mistreat you, well, at some point, the one who has the ultimate authority is going to have the final word in the spiritual realm. So all of this stretch of passage here has to do with who has the authority to have the final decision. And the people around you do not. Well, Peter's group, perhaps more so than us, had to deal with that ongoing persecution. And he continues to remind them that things will work to their advantage and work out differently than the people around them think that they will. Verse 7, the end of all things is near. Therefore be alert and of a sober mind so that you may pray. Anytime in the New Testament you see that phrase, the end of all things is near, or Revelation, these things which must shortly come to pass. How many different opportunities, at least in man's judgment, have there been for God to end this thing? There was a large movement in the 1300s, 1300s, because there was such a big upheaval in Europe. And people were saying, well, this must be the end. Right? You get the Black Plague, this must be the end. You get the wars in Europe in the 1600s, 1700s, the Protestant Reformation, must be time now. So there's that constant, people looking for it. World War I, the Lord was supposed to come right when it was done. World War II, the Lord should be here soon. And just on and on we go. There is a constant looking forward to, longing, hoping among Christians for the end of the world. And Peter says, the end of all things is near. So be alert and of sober mind so that you can pray. Keep your spiritual side in check. Don't let the physical get the best of you. Keep your spiritual mind in check so that you'll be able to pray, so that you can keep that relationship with God as it should be, because it's all going to be over soon. Well, he wrote this 2,000 years ago. What is soon? Peter is also the one that tells us that God is not slack concerning his promise, but is long-suffering toward us, not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. So things rock on year after year, decade after decade, century after century, because God is waiting for that perfect time. And I'm sure that he knows exactly to the second when all this will end. But Peter reminds them, as we should be reminding each other, it's soon. Some of us may live to see it. Maybe none of us will live to see it in the flesh. But it's coming. And when it gets here, the only question will be, whose side are you on? If you choose to go along with those that are abusing you because you don't want to put up with it in the flesh, then expect judgment in the spirit. If you're willing to stand aside from those who are persecuting you in the flesh and stand strong, then expect praise in the spirit. But we have to make our choice in how we respond to the people that are around us currently. And let's put a bookmark in it right there, and Lord willing, we'll pick that up.
So how are we suffering today?
There are a few things, not so much personally, but there are opportunities to suffer that sometimes we take advantage of and sometimes we don't. My personal crusade is to always remind people about the abomination of abortion. So whenever I get a chance to share something online or to write something, I try to put something out there about abortion. There is a growing sense, let's say in the early 70s when Roe v. Wade first came out, the people who were in favor were less vocal. And so you had a very strong sense of moral outrage against it, and that voice was heard. Watch over the last 40 years what has happened. Now it's shifted so that if you're a voice for morality, then you're likely to be chastised by other people for being heartless or, not caring or whatever that they might consider you to be because of the kind of suffering they see these women going through who decide to end their pregnancies that way. But no, not, for Peter and the group he's writing to, it was a matter of if you were openly Christian, that the people around you might take you to court simply for being a Christian. Sunday morning, we're talking about Paul and Silas getting thrown in prison. And the accusations that were made against them were just really not true. But they get beat and they get thrown in jail for it. In Peter's day, those kinds of things were still happening. In fact, they were beginning to increase. And as Peter sends this out, we're probably in the 60s. By the time you get to the late 60s and then again in the 90s, you have terrible persecution of Christians. Because if they remained faithful to Christ, it put them at odds with the cult of the emperor. And if the emperor cult caught up with you, they might just stop you from doing business, or they might end your life. So they had so much power physically, they could do stuff to you. And Peter would remind them, stay faithful. They've only got physical power. They can't do anything to you spiritually. And so if you suffer in the flesh, you're done with sin. You've come through the worst possible hurdle. But no, in our day, like I've said before, if I go to the grocery store and introduce myself to somebody, hi, I'm Jay Tyree. I'm the new preacher at the Church of Christ. There's never a sour face or it's, yay, good to meet you, man. Glad to have you with us. Isn't it wonderful that you're here? And, a lot of times they want to share some kind of spiritual conversation. So openly, publicly, there's no persecution like they had. But there is, and maybe less so for us as older adults, but the kids, they really have to deal with the question of, do I want to be like everybody else? And everybody else in our childhood was kind of like us. And there's a lot of everybody else's now that are very profane, and their belief system is not just not Christian, but anti-Christian. They've soaked up some of the culture, and they'll spew it out for you sometimes. So I think our kids and their kids are going to have to deal with that sort of stuff, maybe more so than we have to.
So our suffering's more so along the lines of just the mental dealings rather than the physical beatings or.
Yeah, in our country, I mean, we've got brothers and sisters in West Africa right now that are
Right.
kind of up against it. And of course, China has always been a problem for the house churches over there. But yeah, Shamrock, Texas, we're doing just fine, thank you. I worked with Mid McKnight in Mahia one time for a couple of years, and he was telling me about being in Jerusalem. And he said, you think about Jerusalem as being the Holy Land. He said, but you don't find a lot of what we would think of as Christians in Jerusalem. He said, I might be really strong in my opposition to another denominational group while I'm here. He said, but you get over there for a month and somebody says they believe in Jesus, and all of a sudden you found a friend. So there's different levels, all around the globe. But I think our biggest threat, I guess, is that it's easy to assimilate. Our culture is, if they're friendly to us as Christians and we're friendly to them as non-Christians, and it all just becomes one big melting pot, and there's not any difference, that may be just as dangerous to us as anything else. That it just gets so easy, we're all in this together when we're very different in a lot of ways.
You just talk about the end of time. Who knows when that's going to happen?
Yeah, just God.
He's the only one,
Yeah.
right? Even Jesus does not know, only the Father in heaven.
He said he'd
No.
come before the man destroyed himself, like a heart of the bone and stuff. They gotta blow him up, it may be coming a lot quicker.
Yeah, I had friends in high school that was their opinion of how the world would end. They read Revelation and they said, well, it must be a hydrogen bomb, so.
No.
Getting up of them, it'd be like in a room full of gas, it'd kill everybody, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but I think God's gonna take care of it himself.
He is.
He's,
Before it gets that bad.
yeah, he's in charge.
He's the only one that's gonna do it.
I don't think it'll be an accident. I think it's well planned, perfectly timed, and coming. Every second that the clock ticks, we're closer. We just don't know how close, which is an incentive to live a holy life all the time. I guess if we knew, like if we could say for certain next Tuesday at 10 o'clock, well, we'd have, a line around the block for the baptistry. There'd be, folks couldn't get in fast enough, but, as long as it's someday.
They won't get rebaptized, but they say you won't do no good.
Yeah.
It's just
What is
one deal, one time, that's it.
I can't think of the name of the singer, but the name of the song was the Mississippi Squirrel Revival. Yeah. You know that one?
Ray Stevens.
Ray Stevens, and part of that song he says, and everybody got rebaptized whether they needed to or not.
Yeah. I think that's what it'll be.
I think so. But we are getting closer. But it's a little harder to take what Peter is saying to his group and apply it immediately to us because we live in the Bible Belt and life is pretty easy for us. But the overall idea is the same. The flesh may have a hold on you, it may have a way that it can hurt you, but it's not anything to be compared to the life of the Spirit that comes after.